to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. I'm your host, Mari Riesberg. Over the past several years, I've combined my degrees in acting and somatic psychology to share my sustaining creativity techniques with performers. And now I've decided to share it with a bigger audience that includes you. I believe we are all creative, and this podcast is all about that. I'll be interviewing people from all backgrounds, ages, and creativity experiences to share just how creative we all are. Today, I'll be chatting with Carlos Baker, songwriter, musician, and author. Please enjoy Carlos Baker. Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. Today, I'm chatting with Carlos Baker, songwriter, musician, and author. Welcome to the podcast.
What's up, Mari?
Well, so much. And
I'm fired up. I'm coming in hot today, baby.
Yeah.
Woo!
Yes, I love it. I love when guests show up ready to go. So
I'm a huge Norm. Do you know that comedian Norm Macdonald?
Oh, yeah.
He died a few years ago, unfortunately. But I love him, and I go through these phases. Like, I feel like it's like once every 4 months I have to watch everything he ever did on YouTube just to get, I don't know why. And the one time he came on Letterman and he like ran, or I think it was Conan actually. He ran out and like sat down real fast, and he was like, okay, let's go. And Conan was like, wow, what, he's like, I don't have time for any of this. Let's get right to the jokes, and I was just like, oh, Norm. So I wanted to come in hot today.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, let's start off by you letting our listeners know a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. Well, I'm a 50-year-old dude. I just turned 50 2 weeks ago. And
happy birthday.
Oh, yes. Thank you. And I guess from a creativity standpoint, I've been creative all my life, and music has been a part of my life, forever. And certainly I've been a big reader. So I've always loved and always had notebooks of writings. I don't even know what they meant before I got into songwriting, but without going into too much detail, because that alone could take an hour. In my mid 30s, after getting married, having a bunch of kids in a row, getting a real job, buying a house, at about my early 30s, I basically came to a full stop in life with depression, anxiety, and just fell apart. Essentially, could no longer function. So went from being a father and husband and, working too hard for the family business and all this stuff to just my mind stopped working properly. And then I was kind of for a couple of years was just trying not to kill myself, trying to get through life, not really sharing with anyone what was happening, this kind of fear of anxiety and fear of panic attacks. And ultimately got help, and as a result of kind of that, this all happened outside of Boston and Providence, Rhode Island. My wife and then 3 young kids, we decided from one day to the next, because I got on the right meds, kind of got to some sort of neutral, okay, now I can at least function.
Yeah.
But then with depression, I don't know how much experience you have with this kind of stuff, and I can only speak for me, but it's like you have the depression, you have the darkness when you're in it.
Yeah.
And then I got on the right meds, and then I had this, okay, what just happened? And and dealing with, for a dude, for me, was dealing with the shame of this. Oh, I was, so weak. I couldn't handle life, and I fell apart. So my wife knew that she's got her master's degree in psychology, and we've been together forever. We've been together for 32 years.
Wow.
And she was like, okay, why don't we pack the house up and move to northern Germany, to the little village where I grew up? And I was like, okay. I'm like, yeah, let's. I don't know if that's the right thing, but I got to do something, because I was you know, I knew I needed time to figure things out and make sense of it. And that's what we did. So like from 1 month to the next, this was in 2009.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, right kind of at that time when the bubble had burst and our house
Hmm.
was underwater anyway. So we literally left the keys, left the keys and we're told the bank we're leaving. And we moved to Germany. And um from the day that I got here, part of my therapy, and
Hmm.
I didn't seek out therapists or formal therapy, but part of
Yeah.
my therapy, and it was twofold, was not working 70 hours a week, A, and B, kind of reintroducing myself to the shit that I love, music, which was playing bass, singing,
Mm.
reading, which I hadn't been, I stopped reading for a decade because it's just how life is, and
Yeah.
I certainly wasn't playing music, that's for sure. And backing up, when we packed up our house in a container,
Hmm.
one of the things we did is I had an old like Nissan minivan. I forget what it was called, but and it was paid for. So we've decided to put that in also in the container. That's an option. And
Yeah.
within the van, we put all our like breakable stuff in the van and then pulled it in and then put our stuff on top of the van. This is, I guess it's typical for moving. And I have this beautiful, as you can see, maybe I can turn my computer. I have this over here
Oh,
hiding,
yeah.
this gorgeous mid-50s K bass upright.
Yeah.
Grew up playing. I've had it for about the teens. I bought it, and I had kind of put it away. It was in my basement because I
Mm.
playing anymore. And I was like, and at that point we didn't have any money, so I was like, well, I'm gonna sell my bass. I can probably get like $1,500 for it. And my wife insisted. She's like, bring it. And I'm like, no, I'm not a musician anymore. She was like, put it in the friggin' van and bring it because you never
Smart,
know.
smart person to
My wife,
have at your
I always
side.
make the wrong decision. She always makes the right decision. So yeah, I did it. And pretty much the first day that we arrived in Germany, I didn't speak any German. We moved into the home where she grew up, where her mother, her grandmother, and her brother and his three kids lived. Me, my wife, and our three children were sleeping on couches for like 3 weeks in
Yeah.
this little house, which is very German. It's three
Yep.
generations. We're in this little village where it feels like it's 100 years back in time. And and I was trying to, first of all, I was trying to figure things out again because I was still very much
Right.
just barely functioning.
Hmm.
And ultimately, kind of fast forwarding, once the container came, which was like 6 weeks later, I started playing bass again. I'm an American dude. I'm a good guy. I've always been a good guy. I can sing. I'm kind of like an entertainer or whatever. And I quickly found this amazing community that was like, come
Mm.
on in, like, and and um that was like crazy to be back in this world so quickly, in this world of music,
Yeah.
and finding that joy of being on, not even necessarily being on stage, but connecting with other dudes on a on that other kind of more pure organic level that I think we probably
Totally.
all feel more when we're kids, I think.
Yeah,
I mean,
I love that. I love the experience of how creativity, what I'm hearing is like supported a community to show up for you and start to
and
expand
and
that in your life.
and it was so organic. I use that word a lot, but and when I think back on it, it was so like, it was not forced at all. And I think
Mm.
that's the beauty of when you become an adult, everything is so at least in my opinion, in my experience, when I hit that kind of, when I decided to settle down,
Yeah.
everything becomes so much more there's no you just get you're in this bubble, right? We had three
Mhm.
kids. I had it wasn't like I was meeting new people anymore.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
love adventure. Like my soul loves adventure.
Mm.
I realize that now that and before I settled down with my wife, I did get to travel and I got to live in
Mhm.
Bolivia with where my mom is from and I was always kind of playing in bands. And I don't think I realized how how much that fed my soul
Yeah.
until this experience kind of brought me back to that
Mm.
world and helped me one in particular, a wonderful from Bulgaria, this wonderful violinist who plays like klezmer and Eastern European
Yeah.
uh, kind of style, gypsy music. He took me under his wing, and I'm not really a super high level player. I'm a good solid player. He's like the highest level player, and he only plays like concert type
Mhm.
venues and stuff. But because he's such a diva and such a um, kind of so difficult from an ego standpoint, he had burned all his bridges. So he's
Mm.
like, oh, another bass player that doesn't have any issues with me. So he took me under his wing, and for like 3 years, I played a ton of gigs with this guy and another
Wow.
woman singer. So it was I don't know. I'm sure I would have survived. I don't think I would have
Sure.
committed suicide. I don't know that I have that in me, but um music at that point it meant the world to me.
Mhm.
It really brought me back to where I think where I'm supposed to be. And also reading. I do feel
Mm.
like
Mhm.
in my darkest times post depression,
Yeah.
when I was most confused and still struggling with all these emotions, again, mostly around this shame of
Mhm.
failure, I found myself very often getting lost in books. One in particular, a book by Larry McMurtry, which is called Lonesome Dove.
Mhm.
And I read it like I hate to exaggerate, but I read it literally like 10 times.
Mhm.
I think I was reading it because they were like my buddies, these characters, and this world
Yeah.
they lived in. I don't know if you know they made a mini series about it too, but it's these two guys, these real man's men, um, former Texas Rangers. They took 3,000 head of cattle from Texas to Montana, and it's
Mhm.
just their story of
Sure.
friendship, of camaraderie, and experience. And that adventure, I would just get lost in that.
Mm.
And that, yeah, I think now, again, at the time, it was just happening. I was just trying to get through. I was doing my best as a father. We had
Mhm.
another kid at that point, my wife and I. So we had a newborn, a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 4-year-old. So, and I was staying home with that. I stayed home. My wife went back to work full time, and I became a stay-at-home father.
Yeah.
So, I was just trying to keep my head above water, but it was the, geez, it was the craziest, obviously, time that I had in my life, but it was also the best.
I
Like,
like
like,
hearing that you can see the challenges and that it was the best and the most
oh yeah,
difficult simultaneously, that
oh,
both can exist together.
I think I was the most alive that
Mm.
that the darkness, there is something alluring about darkness if you can learn from it. I think
Sure.
if you can come out the other side and be like, oh, I got to see a whole entire side of my brain or mind or
Yeah.
however you want to look at it. I got the chance to experience it, see the world from a completely different angle for a bunch of years, and thankfully I am relatively healthy today. Um,
Well, you're
but
still here to talk about it. So
I'm still here,
that's,
man. And
yeah.
and and so many, from a songwriting standpoint, um so much of so many of the songs that I've written and brought to life, whether it be just on acoustic guitar or with producers in studios, so many of them are about that stuff,
Yeah.
either directly or indirectly,
I
because
love
that's how
it.
life works, right?
Well, I'm so curious, seeing that creativity has, it sounds like, really helped you through challenging points in your life, whether intentional or not. I'm
Mhm.
curious what it means to you to be creative.
Well, I guess for me, there's a couple different ways. Creativity. The stuff that I love the most is those moments of inspiration. So, as a songwriter, the the uh, the thing I dream about is when there's a word or a phrase, a lot of times in books, or a paragraph, or something that kind of clicks, and I've had this experience enough times to know it and feel it, and like there'll be something that just clicks, and I'll be like, oh, maybe that feels like something's there. And then in the next days, it'll kind of percolate somehow, and at some point it'll want to come out. And so for me, that's the greatest. I guess it's inspiration, but I would imagine it's the subconscious somehow working in there, and it must be simmering or something goes on, because how else would you explain it? And then there's the other side where you and I talked to before we pushed record, that I was um, in 2017. I challenged myself to write a book. I was like, I think I can do it. I
Mhm.
think I have what it takes to, very specifically, because I'm not I don't know how to write fine prose, and I don't aspire to be Dostoevsky, but I felt like my kids were big young adult readers, my daughters,
Mhm.
and everything they read, because we're in America, I mean, we're in Germany, so anything in English I was reading. This was before I had a Kindle. I was reading all their young adult books. And what I get the sense from young adult books, what differentiates them is it's so much more about the story and not about prose. It's not about
Mhm.
kind of, obviously, a 14-year-old kid is not going to read Tom Clancy. It would just be too much.
Mhm.
So when I read a bunch of these young adult books, I was like, I feel like I can do this. I watched my children grow. I was with them. I'm really tight with my kids. I'm so lucky. And I was super, maybe because I was in this weird place, and when I was with them, I was so present because they brought me so much joy. I don't know. But I was really aware of what they were experiencing, and
Mm.
you know, I was like, oh, I feel like I could transition all that stuff into a book. So I challenged myself. And that was a different experience, because then that's not an inspiration. Then it's like, okay, I'm going to sit down every day,
Yeah.
every chance I get, and I'm going to write. And what I found, Murray, with that experience is the therapeutic value in that is you're digging, at least for me, it's like I was digging into all the experiences that I've had in my life.
Mhm.
Anything that, for me, the let's say the 10 people that made the biggest impression upon me. A lot of times they were darker, the
Mm.
kind of darker people, not black people. I love black people, but the like my best friend was a heroin addict for 20 years, and I loved that kid. We were high school best buds. We
Mm.
went to
Mhm.
college freshman year, and then he became a heroin addict.
Yeah.
And but I still loved him. I knew, I knew he had troubles. I knew he had issues. I was still tight with his parents. And I watched his kind of journey of getting sober and finally finding some peace. So people like that, there were times over the years where he would say things to me. And this was the creative part for writing a book is, okay, what characters am I going to write about? And what the hell do I have to say?
Mm.
And what I
Mhm.
had to say a lot of the times were things that I hadn't really probably done too much, thinking about why they impressed upon me. But I knew
Yeah.
they impressed upon me, and they stayed in my brain, right?
Mhm.
So of course, when I sat down to write this book, the characters, one character of course me, and my experiences as a child going through, I had cancer when I was a kid. So when I was
Mm.
12, I had cancer, and had 2 years of chemotherapy, and they amputated my left leg to the middle of my thigh. I had
Mm.
tumors in both my lungs. My chances of survival were 0.00.
Wow. Yeah.
For whatever reason, I survived. So So of course I used that character but used but kind of tweaked it a little where he was terminal. So I put
Mm-hmm.
myself, I used my experiences and then I tweaked it a little. But using him as an example, this character, as I was writing this stuff, I was like, okay, well, I haven't done much. I'm not one of those guys who dwelled on those 2 crazy years that I was in the hospital in
Sure.
Boston Children's. But I'm going to have to, if I want to write a book, I'm going to have to dig in and try and remember some of the things and there was so much stuff that
Mm-hmm.
came out that I either had never talked about,
Yeah.
possibly even with my mom, or even with my dad, or there was stuff that maybe I had talked about but just hadn't thought about in 25 years, or
Mm-hmm.
30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give an example. Is the character so the main characters is there's a 16-year-old the main character is a 16-year-old girl, and on her 16th birthday her father gives her a journal that her brother, which was my character, she was 1 years old when he died. So
Mm.
he wrote this journal and and died at 16 and the last months of his life, and gave it to his father and said, give it to Ivy when she's 16. That she'll get to know me in my own words.
Yeah.
So I was trying to imagine, what if I was in that position, what would I share with my then daughters? What would be
Mm.
appropriate as a 16-year-old? What
Yeah.
would be important to me? So those were the things where I was like, oh, this is such a fun kind of process, and it's so different from a creative standpoint than songwriting, because
Sure.
it's so much more I guess intellectual, because you actually have to grind that was an awesome experience too. It took me 18 months of writing every day,
Mm-hmm.
and then and I ended up at about 130,000 words, which is about an appropriate normal book.
Yeah.
And then worked with an amazing developmental editor who helped me whittle it down, and then rewrote it 10 times, and when the day was finished, and as you can imagine, like many creative or artists, um I have major self-esteem issues with success and failure and all this,
Sure.
you know these ridiculous things, because what is success? But I can tell you, when that book came back from the publisher and I had it in my hands, it meant the world to me. It was a huge kind of accomplishment at a time that I needed to have accomplishments.
Sure.
In retrospect, I didn't really need to have it, but at the time, I
It
thought I
felt
did.
really good. It sounds
It
like
meant
to hold
it
that.
meant so much to me, and it wasn't if it was good or bad. It was that I actually did it. And
Yeah.
that is something to be said.
I mean, it sounds like so many things from your life, from other people's lives, really inspired so much of the book and how you wrote the book. I'm curious, in your life today, who or what inspires you?
Um, oh, uh, Radiohead and Tom York mostly. Now, I love Radiohead. I love music. Songwriters. I'm a big fan of a band called Wilco,
Yeah.
and this guy Jeff Tweedy, who's,
Yep.
from a songwriting standpoint, or maybe from a creativity standpoint, those guys just, they are such big part of my life. To
Mm.
every day, every single day, every minute that I have free, I have music on.
Mhm.
Or in many cases, I find myself inspired by uh, comedians, which is weird. I listened to this podcast in particular. It's called "How Did This Get Made?" I don't know if you ever heard of it.
Yeah.
It's these two guys and a girl, Jason Mantzoukas, who I just love. I don't know what it is about his view on the world, and then his co-host, his name is Paul Scheer. I love those two guys, and I listen to their podcasts, and I tend to listen to them over and over as well when I'm in the
Uh-huh.
car, and and I was in Chicago. spent quite a bit of time in Chicago, and last time I was in Chicago, they did a live podcast at a theater there. So I
Yeah.
got to see them in person, and that was super inspirational, man. Just to see, I'm a musician. I feel like I put my 10,000 hours in, right? Like
Hmm.
I can get on stage very comfortably. I can sing tunes,
Yeah.
and I think to see those guys on stage in front of 1,500 people, and because they've put their 20 years of improv in,
Hmm.
the way they can, and I get that it's kind of equation-y, the jokes, when you get to know them, which I
Sure.
have, you start to you start to kind of get a feel for the equations they use. Uh, Regardless, I feel like I'm inspired by those guys because they
Mm.
make me laugh. What's better than that, right? What's better
Yeah.
than having that ability?
That's awesome to kind of follow someone enough so that you do start seeing the equation of their
Yeah.
humor or and how it then impacts you and brings you joy. And I wonder, how do you take that joy that you get from listening to their podcast or seeing them live do a show and turn that or help fuel your own creativity from that?
Well, I'm a dreamer, so I think
Mm.
I I'm a dreamer, and more than ever as I get older, which I feel like it should be the opposite. And a lot of times, um, when I listen to another podcast that I have listened to all the episodes multiple times, this guy Gilbert Gottfried has a podcast. He also died, unfortunately,
Yeah.
in 22, but he too, I think he's funny because he would have these old old Hollywood legends on. That was his thing. They
Yeah.
would having like 80, 90-year-old, guys, men and women. And so often they'd agree that they were so fearless as young people. And then
Mm.
as they got older, they they tend to recognize the weight of everything in in life, which I found fascinating. Um, but I feel like for me, I am more fearless than ever. Like I
Mm.
want to do stuff. I don't know that I have the bandwidth to be an actor, but
Yeah.
if I lived in I'm 50. If my wife and I, we have a 13-year-old, when he leaves the house, if she and I decide to move somewhere where that's an option, I don't know that I would not take that opportunity. I think I would
Hmm.
love to try theater or
Yeah.
anything. I'd try anything. So I think those guys inspire me because they do it, right?
Hmm.
I love that. I love that at the end of their shows, they're like, is there anything you want to plug? Yeah, I got a movie coming out. I'm on this TV show. I'm on that. And I'm thinking to myself, so you guys are traveling to do, these guys are working 50 hours a week. I think it's easy to glamorize being a celebrity, but I would rather glamorize the fact that these guys are grinding day in and day out
Yeah.
to continue to be relevant and continue to be kind of
Mm.
growing. And
Hmm.
to me, that's inspiring because I'm not ready to wither away, man. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
just getting started.
Yeah, sounds like it. Absolutely. I mean, the, it sounds like there have been periods in your life where creativity wasn't very active, and many people struggle with their own creativity. How would you encourage others to find creativity in their life?
Well, I get bummed out I get kind of bummed out when people of my age, or I guess even younger, when you get that feeling like, oh, you've thrown the towel in already. Like that's such a
Uh-huh.
bummer to me, right? Like
Yeah.
um I do you do feel it in sometimes in the younger generation. But
Mm.
I don't want to feel like I'm that guy that's like in my day, but um creativity it's so easy to tap into. There's
Mm.
just there's nothing. like, especially nowadays, there's literally nothing holding you back, and other than the fear of failure. But I like, we have some kids in this little village, where my kids will be like, yeah, so and so has a YouTube channel, and I'm like, freaking awesome, dude. Like, let's check it out. It's terrible. They have 3 views on each one of their videos, but good for them, man. It's like, so
Yeah.
what? Because in the end, first of all, none of this matters anyway. But in the end, it's like, you should be doing that because that's something you want to try and grow from, and that's really what it's supposed to be. It's personal,
Mm-hmm.
personal growth, which, I've done enough of these podcasts with people like you to know that, not, I mean, not all of them are great. And I would
Yeah.
imagine not all of them have, a lot of listeners, but I have gotten a ton of value out of every single one of them because I'm doing it. I'm, I'm,
Mm-hmm.
I'm putting myself out there. And talking to you is super therapeutic because I'm saying things that perhaps I had never thought of before. And most of
Yeah.
this stuff is a little bit more, I kind of have, um, I recognize a lot of the things I'm talking about, I've said before, but to me, this is everything. And if my wife, for instance, if my wife or someone I know is like, oh, you're doing another interview. And I'm like, yeah, man. And I'm freaking proud of it. Like, I love
Yeah.
this stuff. And when I'm done with these interviews, I feel like I feel so great because I'm like, oh, that was creative. Which
It is.
that's all it is.
It's
That's
all
it.
part of it. I
Dude,
love the kind of reminder that it's okay to be a beginner. It's okay to only have 3 views on a YouTube channel. It's okay to
the best part.
start.
It's the
And
best part because if you
yeah,
don't have that, you have no perspective. That's the only way we can have perspective in life. I mean,
so true. Well, this has been such a treat getting to chat with you. I just have one last question.
oh,
What does it feel like in your body to be creative?
oh, I would imagine I'm not a drug guy, but for me, it's a drug. I mean,
Mhm.
um, whether it be, that moment of writing a song or jamming with my buddies or being on stage in front of, waiters and waitresses and no one else. It's all a drug to me, man. I love
Mm.
it. And as I get older, I appreciate it more than ever. So I don't see myself ever going through life without having creativity every day in my life. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not doing something,
Yeah.
if nothing else, reading, man. I feel like reading is, probably my favorite activity there is. I love reading. It's my 3 hours at night, from
Me
11 to
too.
1 in the morning. That's
Yeah.
when I'm happy, man. I
I
got
love
no
it.
worries in the world, lost in a book.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Carlos, for taking the time to chat with me. If people
Thank
want to
you.
learn more about your book, how to get in touch with you, social media, what do you got going on?
I'm not so hip on social media, but yeah, please download my albums. The one I'm I guess most proud of is last year I got to spend 6 months in Chicago working with a wonderful producer named Brian Deck, who who is towards the end of his career, which is why he was willing to work with me. But I had this awesome experience. I threw a bunch of money at it, but
Mhm.
I got to experience what it's like to make a real album with a real pro who's done it
Mm.
and has his guys, and got to experience that, and took more than the final product. What I got out of it was, you know, it was a master's degree in life
Yeah.
of seeing how he works, seeing my role as a low self-esteem
Mm.
musician. He Part of the producer's role, now I understand, is helping the musician understand his role in this process.
Yeah.
And when studio musicians come in, these monster older Chicago studio guys that have been doing it for all their careers, when they come in, and I was feeling so small, a guy
Mm.
like Brian as a a seasoned professional producer, helped me understand, dude,
Mhm.
you are the talent in the room. These guys are looking to you. You're
Yeah.
bringing songs to us. That's not a talent these guys have. That's why they're studio musicians. So don't, so those little lessons or big lessons, again, more than the final product. Of course, I'm proud of the album, but it was the best experience, man. It
That
was,
sounds awesome.
yeah, he was great, Brian. But yeah, so the album's called Find Your Way. It's streaming everywhere. And yeah, download it, please. And the book is called Songs for Ivy. It's a good book. It's interesting. Check it out.
Cool. Well, thank you again for taking the time to chat with me. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
I had a blast. Thank you, Marie.
Thanks for listening to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. We'd love to keep in touch, so follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We are at Sustaining Creativity. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tag your friends and family so they can listen too. We love to hear from you, so leave your reviews, comments, and questions. Check out our website, sustainingcreativity.com, for upcoming offerings and creativity coaching. Tune in Tuesdays for our next episode. And remember, with creativity, anything's possible.